This is International Master Bryan Smith with ChessLecture.com, and today I'm going to take a break from my series on the Sicilian defense, Sicilia side, and show some combinations, with a particular theme in common here. This is called the Novotny theme, where a piece is sacrificed on a square, and whichever way it's taken, it interferes with the actions of the opponent's pieces. It's named after apparently a Czech composer named Novotny, problem composer. And in this video, I'm going to be showing first two positions that were made up, which are from etudes, and then I believe three from actual games, where the game was decided very beautifully by this theme, which is fairly rare in practical play, but it can happen, and it's always important to widen your knowledge of different tactical ideas. So here, the first position is a study by Umnov from 1928, and we see the white's down a rook, but he has two powerful, dangerous passed pawns here. So white starts off with the move b7, threatening to queen the pawn, and black needs to play move bishop h2 to stop the pawn, only move. If rook to h8, then white can play, white can queen the pawn, and black has to take it, and then king takes, and black can't really stop the e-pawn. Bishop h2 check, king c8, bishop d6, king d7, followed by e7, and white wins. So he has to play the move bishop h2, and now e7. Actually, sorry, c4 check. Important to play this move first, otherwise black will have rook h8 check after e7. So c4 check opens up the bishop, and now black can move his king anywhere. Of course, it's going to be the same idea, but he plays the move king a6, seeing the whole combination of preparing an interesting defense here. After any other move, white plays the same way, and there are no complications though. So now e7, threatening to queen the pawn again. Only one move for black to stop it is rook e3. And now here's where we come to the Novotny theme. White has the b-pawn and e-pawn both threatening to queen, but b-pawn is stopped by a bishop from h2, and e-pawn is stopped by the rook from e3. We can see that the line h2 to b8 and the line e3 to e8 intersect at the square e5. And that's where white plays the bishop to bishop e5. So now, whichever way black takes it, he's queening a pawn. So for example, bishop takes e5, white queens the e-pawn and wins easily. And if black doesn't take it, white's going to queen one of the pawns as well. But black has a very neat defense here. He plays rook takes e5. So seemingly blocking out the bishop, it looks like white should just queen the pawn, but let's be a little careful. If white queens the pawn now, black plays the move rook takes e7. So if the queen moves away now, queen has to take on h2. If the queen moves away somewhere, wherever, h8 or wherever, then rook to a7 is checkmate. So meanwhile, if queen to c8 check, king a7, okay, checkmate is threatened on a7, and queen to d8 check, black can just play, I suppose, rook to c7, and I don't see where white's going here. If the queen moves, then rook to a7 check, only other move, or checkmate, the only other move is king to b8, and then black can just move the bishop somewhere, and white's in zugzwang. He has to move the king back and forth, so I guess it's a draw. So only move for white is queen takes h2, but then rook e8 check. Only move is queen to b8, and now black shouldn't take the queen. Black shouldn't take the queen because king takes b8, and white's winning this endgame. Black pawns are falling. King b8, king c8, followed by king to d7, and black can't defend his pawns. But instead of taking the queen, black has a very beautiful move here. Rook to d8. Only one legal move for white. Queen takes d8, but it's stalemate. So white shouldn't queen the pawn. Once we see that, though, the solution is pretty obvious. Bishop e5, rook takes e5, setting white the biggest trouble, but now white makes a knight with check. And whichever way the black king goes, the rook is forked. For example, king a5, knight takes c6 check, followed by taking the rook and queening the pawn, or king to b6, knight to d7 check, followed by taking the rook and then queening the pawn. King c7, knight takes e5, and the pawn can't be stopped. So this is the pretty basic form of the Novotny theme in a made-up position. In the next position, this is a study by Van der Heijden from 2004, and it's kind of a ridiculous comical position here, which you wouldn't really expect to get in a real game, but I thought the solution was kind of funny. White's going up, which is sometimes hard to determine in some of these positions. So white's going toward the last rank, and the black king is on his side of the board. White could checkmate by a8 or d8 or rook takes h4, but a8 is stopped by black's queen on a1. d8 is stopped by the rook on d3, and rook takes h4 would be met by rook takes c4. Rook from c4 takes h4. So, as we'll see pretty quick, of course, black has a huge material advantage in the meantime, but as we see, all of these lines kind of intersect on the d4 square. So white plays the move queen to d4. Only move not only to win, but just otherwise white's completely lost. But although the queen can be taken 8 different ways, all of them lead to checkmate within 2 moves. So if the queen is taken by a pawn, or either one of the pawns, then white has a choice. You can either make a queen on d8 or play rook takes h4 with checkmate. Same thing if the queen is taken by a black knight or bishop. White has a choice. So knight takes d4. We can make a queen, or we can play rook takes h4 and checkmate, because both black rooks are blocked in that case. If the queen takes d4, white queens the pawn and checkmates black. And now it comes to the rooks. If rook c takes d4, then rook takes h4 doesn't work, because after black takes, he's still defending against d8, but instead white does it the other way, queens the pawn on d8, forcing rook takes d8, and then rook takes h4 is checkmate. If black takes the queen with the other rook, then we play rook takes h4, and after rook takes h4, queen the pawn. So sort of obviously kind of ridiculous comical position to start off with, but kind of a funny solution. Okay, the next 3 positions are from real games. So this is the well-known example, Tarrasch versus 3 amateurs, which you may have seen before. It's been shown in various sources. Here, white could checkmate on queen to b7 followed by rook to a1 if it weren't for black's queen. Meanwhile, if the rook could take on c5, that would be checkmate. So these 2 lines intersect on c7, and here Tarrasch played the move bishop to c7. So first of all, this one's a little bit more complicated than the first one. Just like the last one, it involves some after the Novotny theme, it involves some deflection also. So black has to choose first of all, queen to b7 and rook to c5 are both threatened. So black's going to have to take the bishop. If he takes with a rook, then white can play queen to b7 check. And rook takes b7 is met by rook takes c5. While king takes a5 is met by rook to a1 or rook to a2, doesn't matter. Queen to a4 is the only move, but then rook takes a4. So rook takes c7 doesn't work. Queen takes c7 is now met by the other deflection. Rook takes c5, forcing move queen takes c5, then queen to b7 check, and king takes a5, rook to a1, checkmate. So this is a very famous example from a practical game. This move bishop c7, putting the bishop where it can be taken two different ways, and either way results in black's pieces getting interfered with. So for example, on the other hand, rook takes c5 immediately wouldn't work because the queen is on d7 and the rook can take on c5, and queen to b7 also wouldn't work because then the rook still guards c5. So okay, this was another pretty well-known example of this theme. This was an offhand game between MacDonald and Byrne from 1910, from Liverpool 1910, and here it's White's move in this position. White is completely winning after simply bishop e4. The black bishop on g5 can't be defended. Black has no special tactics, but White, probably thinking the game is over, played the move bishop h5 with the same idea. Black bishop on g5 can't be defended. White has a huge attack after this, it seems, but now there is a special tactic here. Byrne played the unbelievable move queen to g4. So this move is the same theme. Whichever way White takes it, it blocks something. So he had a choice. If bishop or the pawn take on g4, then black takes on d2. And if bishop takes d2, there are no special discovered checks, so black's just up a piece. And same thing if the pawn takes. He played rook takes g4. If queen takes g5, queen takes g5, rook takes g5, then king h6, and the rook is chased away from guarding the bishop. Black wins a piece. So he played rook takes g4, and there's nothing else White can really do here. Black threatens, of course, knight f3 and so on, taking the queen as well. Queen takes g1 and taking the queen. So there's no other move for White here. So he played rook takes g4, and now the point, after rook takes g4, the bishop is blocked from h5, so knight to f3 check, followed by knight takes d2. So here's how the game finished. King g2, knight takes d2, rook takes g5 check, king h6, and White maintains material equality, but black's knight is now going to start taking the queenside pawns. So after he played h4, black played knight takes b3. Now rook f5, knight takes a5, bishop e2, king g7, simply avoiding any rook f6 thing, h5, rook f7, rook g5 check, king h8, h6, rook f6, rook h5, and I'll stop here. It's clear black's winning. He played rook f4, and the h-pawn is going nowhere. Black's taking the c-pawn, so clearly winning position. Black won in a few more moves. So this is queen g4, of course, is a very famous move. Okay, the final example is a position that's just fascinated me when I was first learning how to play chess. It's really amazing. One of the best combinations I've ever seen. It's the game Koskinen versus Kosmin from, not sure what year, I didn't write it down, but absolute I think from the 50s. And black's move here. Black is down two pieces, and the knight is hanging on e3, sort of. But it's clear that White's king is in very bad shape. However, Black has to act quickly, or White's going to play b3 and king b2. So here he played absolutely beautiful combination. To start off with, notice that b4 could be checkmate if it were not guarded by the queen and bishop. And knight c2 could be checkmate if the rook on h2 weren't guarding that square. So intersection is d2, but we have to see how to do this. So black played the move queen takes b4 to start off with. Only move for white after this queen sacrifice was bishop takes b4. And now, of course, if a takes b4, then queen takes b4, and white's just winning there. But now black played the shocking move rook to d2. And amazingly, after this move, there's no defense. It can be taken 5 different ways, but any way leads to checkmate. So, for example, knight takes d2, knight b takes d2. Black has his choice: knight to c2 checkmate, or a takes b4 checkmate. Same thing with the other knight. And if bishop takes d2, then knight to c2 is checkmate. This blocks off the rook from h2. And if rook takes d2, then a takes b4 is checkmate. So this leaves what was actually played. Well, we can look at some quiet moves, but there is no way to guard the 2 threats. So, for example, b3, black plays a takes b4, checkmate. And if the bishop moves somewhere else, knight c2, basically the 2 threats can't be defended both at the same time. A takes b4 and knight to c2, and there's nowhere for white's king to go. So that leaves what was played in the game, queen takes d2, and now, as we saw in the Tarrasch example and in the study by Van der Heyden, now comes, after this place in the piece at the crucial intersection point, comes the deflection. So knight to c2. Forcing queen takes c2, and then a takes b4, checkmate. This is how the game finished. So this was one of my favorite combinations that I've ever seen. Rook to d2, simply putting the rook where it can be captured 5 different ways. A quiet move after a queen sacrifice. Really amazing. So I hope you've enjoyed these examples from practical play and from made-up positions from studies, and know a little bit more about what's known as the Novotny theme. This has been International Master Bryan Smith with ChessLecture.com.